David had always found solace in the rhythmic clatter of the train tracks, the hum of the engine a soothing background to his thoughts. He had been a cargo train engineer for nearly a decade, and the wilderness was his constant companion. The vast stretches of untouched forest, the sprawling valleys, and the snow-capped mountains were a reminder of nature's beauty and raw power. He loved the serenity of it all, just him, his train, and the endless horizons. On a cool autumn morning, David embarked on what seemed to be a routine journey, hauling goods through one of the most remote parts of the country. His route took him through a dense forest where tall pine trees stood like ancient sentinels on either side of the tracks. There were no towns for miles, just an expanse of wilderness that stretched far beyond the reach of human civilization. David didn't mind the isolation. It was part of the reason he had chosen this job. Out here, the world felt simpler, quieter. After several hours on the job, with nothing but the sounds of the train and the wind in his ears, something unusual caught David's attention. Up ahead, a dark shape lay across the tracks, blocking his path. He squinted, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. At first he thought it might be a fallen tree or some debris left by a recent storm. But as he drew closer, he realized it was something far more unsettling: a pack of wolves. David's heart quickened. Wolves were not an uncommon sight in the wilderness, but they typically kept their distance from trains, wary of the noise and the vibrations. For them to be so close to the tracks was odd. His mind raced as he calculated his options. He could try to slow the train and ease past them. But something in their behavior caught his attention. The wolves weren't just aimlessly wandering, they were circling a specific spot on the tracks, moving with a strange, almost frantic energy. They seemed to be guarding something. Instinctively, David reached for the emergency brake, bringing the massive train to a grinding halt just a few yards short of the pack. The train's powerful screech echoed through the forest, but the wolves remained unfazed. They continued to move restlessly, as though caught between fear and a sense of duty. David's curiosity got the better of him, and despite the danger, he climbed down from the train to investigate. As he approached, he kept his movements slow and deliberate, not wanting to startle the animals. The wolves, to his surprise, didn't growl or threaten him. Instead, they watched him with wary eyes, their fur bristling slightly in the chilly air. David could feel the tension in the air, but there was no outright aggression. It was then that David saw a small bundle nestled among the wolves. His breath caught in his throat. The bundle, wrapped in tattered rags, was far too small to be anything other than a baby. He blinked in disbelief, his mind struggling to process the scene before him. What was a baby doing out here, in the middle of the wilderness? And why were these wolves guarding it? The wolves stood their ground as David moved closer, but they did not attack. Their eyes, piercing and intelligent, seemed to communicate something beyond words. It was as if they understood the gravity of the situation. Slowly, with his heart pounding in his chest, David knelt down and carefully reached for the bundle. As he lifted the child into his arms, the wolves stepped back, their job seemingly complete. The baby stirred in David's arms but did not cry. David felt a wave of relief wash over him as he realized the child was still alive. Though cold and weak, the baby seemed otherwise unharmed. Without wasting another second, David rushed back to the train, cradling the baby protectively against his chest. His hands shook as he fumbled with the radio, desperately calling for help. A nearby town responded immediately, sending medical personnel to meet him at the next station. As David waited for help to arrive, he couldn't shake the image of the wolves standing over the baby. He glanced back toward the tracks, half expecting to see them still there, but they had vanished into the forest, melting back into the shadows from where they had come. The baby was rushed to the nearest hospital, where doctors confirmed that, against all odds, the child was healthy. News of the incident spread like wildfire, and David found himself at the center of a media storm. Reporters flooded the small town where he had stopped the train, all clamoring to hear the story of the wolves and the baby. People were captivated by the tale of these wild creatures who had, for reasons no one could fully explain, chosen to protect a human child. The baby's parents were eventually found. They had been hikers who had gotten lost deep in the forest several days earlier. In a moment of desperation, they had been forced to leave their baby behind, hoping that someone or something might find the child and offer it a better chance of survival. In their wildest dreams, they had never imagined that their baby would be saved by a pack of wolves. David became a local hero, though he was uncomfortable with the attention. He gave a few interviews, but he always downplayed his role in the rescue. To him, the real heroes were the wolves. They had defied every expectation, every assumption about what wild animals were supposed to be. Instead of seeing the baby as prey, they had seen it as something worth protecting. In the months that followed, David couldn't stop thinking about that day. Every time he drove through that part of the wilderness, he found himself scanning the trees, hoping for a glimpse of fur or the flicker of wolf eyes in the shadows. He never saw them again, but their presence lingered in his thoughts. As time passed, David's story took on a life of its own. It became a legend, told and retold by people all across the region. Some embellished the details, turning the wolves into mythical creatures, protectors of the forest. Others saw it as a sign that nature had its own way of looking after the innocent. But for David, it was a reminder of the profound and mysterious connections that existed between all living things. He often wondered why the wolves had acted the way they did. Was it some ancient instinct buried deep within their DNA? Or had they recognized something in the baby that had stirred their protective instincts? David would never know the answer, but in a way it didn't matter. What mattered was that in that moment, the wolves had shown a capacity for kindness that went beyond the boundaries of species and survival. David continued his work as a train operator for many years after the incident. Though he never had another encounter quite like the one with the wolves, he carried the memory of that day with him always. It was a reminder that the world was full of surprises, and that sometimes the most extraordinary acts of compassion could come from the most unexpected places. And so the legend of David and the wolves lived on, a story of bravery, kindness, and the mysterious bond between man and nature, a bond that, on that fateful day, had saved a life and forever changed the way people viewed the wild world around them.